ready! Forward, march!
You are about to learn the shocking truth about the wars of ancient Egypt. Cinema has created an image for us of the Egyptian warrior in a golden helmet. We are used to seeing ancient Egypt as a civilization of monumental builders, pharaohs, and priests. But their war machine often remains in the shadow of the pyramids. We imagine their army was as eternal and immobile as the Sphinx. But this is a profound misconception. The real military doctrine of Egypt was flexible, adaptive, and in many ways, shockingly pragmatic. Their strength lay not only in numbers or bravery, but in ingenious organization, psychology, and the ability to turn their greatest weaknesses into a deadly advantage. The Egyptians learned to fight not only against men, but against nature itself, turning the merciless desert into their greatest ally. They created a system that fed and supplied tens of thousands of men, where it seemed not even 100 could survive. Watch this video to the end, and you will learn why the most famous Egyptian weapon, the chariot, was used in a way completely different from what is shown in films, and what single logistical secret allowed the pharaohs to claim victories hundreds of kilometers from the fertile Nile Valley. What if I told you that everything you believed about the mighty army of the pharaohs is false? Movies and games show us orderly ranks of professional soldiers marching through the desert, but the reality was far more complex. For most of its history, especially in the Old and Middle Kingdoms, Egypt did not have a large standing army at all. This seems unthinkable for a civilization that built such monuments. The core of the armed forces was a militia system, or conscription. When the pharaoh needed to go on a campaign, he would give the order, and the local governors, or nomarchs, would gather troops from their territories. This was, in essence, a feudal duty, not service in a regular army. The recruitment system was simple and pragmatic. Typically, one man was required from every 100 households. These men were taken from their fields and workshops, given basic equipment, and sent on campaign. Their motivation and combat skills naturally varied greatly. The training for such units was minimal, limited to learning to march in formation and handle simple weapons like a spear and shield. This was an army of farmers, not battle-hardened veterans. Their main task was not so much to display heroism. The loyalty of these soldiers often belonged less to the distant pharaoh and more to their local nomarch, who fed them and led them into battle. This system was effective for protecting borders or for punitive expeditions into Nubia, but it was completely unprepared to face a serious, technologically advanced enemy. Everything changed after a catastrophe, the invasion of the Hyksos, who conquered Lower Egypt. This humiliation taught the Egyptians a bitter lesson. It was then, during the New Kingdom, that the army we are used to imagining was born. The liberator pharaohs like Amenhotep and Thutmose III understood that a permanent, professional, and loyal army was needed to protect and expand the empire. They reformed the system. But even this new professional army had its own secret, which shatters the myth of its uniformity. It relied heavily on foreign mercenaries. Nubian archers, Libyan warriors, and even sea peoples like the Shirden formed the elite of the Egyptian forces. Thus, the shocking truth is that the invincible Egyptian army was, for a long time, a militia. And in its golden age, it became a complex, international conglomerate. It was a force held together by money, ideology, and brilliant organization. Do you think an army based on conscription and a large number of mercenaries can be truly called national? Share your opinion in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next investigations into the military secrets of the past. Are you ready to learn the truth about why the Egyptians went to war at all? For modern people, war is about politics or economics. But for an ancient Egyptian, it was much deeper. To understand their war machine, you must first understand their worldview. The entire Egyptian civilization was built on one fundamental concept, Ma'at. This word can be translated as order, truth, harmony, or justice. Ma'at was the divine established order of things from the moment of creation. The sun rises in the east, the Nile floods. Society has a clear hierarchy. All of this was a manifestation of Ma'at. The main task of the pharaoh, as a living god and high priest, was to uphold Ma'at at all costs. The opposite of Ma'at was Isfet, chaos, disorder, lies, and injustice. Isfet was not just an abstract evil, it had concrete manifestations. A drought, a rebellion in a province, or an enemy attack, all were manifestations of chaos threatening the very cosmos. Therefore, for Egypt, war was not just an act of aggression or defense, it was a religious duty. It was a cosmic ritual to restore Ma'at and suppress Isfet. This is why on temple walls, we see gigantic figures of pharaohs single-handedly crushing crowds of tiny enemies. This was not an accurate recording of events, like a modern photograph. It was a theological declaration. Here is the pharaoh, the agent of order, defeating the forces of chaos. This ideological foundation gave the Egyptian army incredible moral strength. A soldier going into battle believed he was not just capturing loot or land for his king. He was fighting for the stability of the entire world, for the sun to rise again tomorrow. Every military campaign began and ended with complex religious rituals. Priests accompanied the army, interpreting omens and ensuring divine support. A victory was proof that the gods were on Egypt's side. This concept also explains the Egyptians' attitude toward conquered peoples. Their goal was rarely total annihilation. The main task was to bring Ma'at to the lands of chaos. That is, to subordinate them, incorporate them into the Egyptian system, and force them to pay tribute. This ideology was a powerful psychological weapon, uniting a diverse army of conscripts and mercenaries. But even the strongest ideology needed a technological advantage. What if I told you that everything you know about the main Egyptian weapon, the chariot, is outdated? In the next chapter, we'll reveal the secret that made it not just a weapon. The secret of the Egyptian chariot lies in its unique design, which they borrowed from the Hyksos and perfected. First, it was incredibly light. It was made not of massive timber, but of lightweight woods, leather, and woven reeds. The entire structure was so light and delicate that one or two men could easily carry it over an obstacle. This was critically important for mobility on rough terrain. The second secret was the axle's position. Unlike other designs, the Egyptians placed the axle at the very end of the body. This made the platform less stable, but it provided phenomenal maneuverability. Such a chariot could turn practically on the spot, which was unthinkable for its heavier counterparts. The crew consisted of two men, a driver and a warrior. The driver was a true professional, controlling the horses with reins wrapped around his torso to free his hands for a shield. The warrior, however, was almost never a spearman or swordsman. His main weapon was the powerful composite bow. The chariot was not a tank, but a mobile firing platform. Only after the enemy formation was broken and had faltered did the infantry move in to complete the rout. The chariot was the weapon of the elite, a symbol of status and the divine power of the pharaoh, who was often depicted racing ahead of his army. If you learned something new about the true purpose of Egyptian chariots, don't forget to like this video so we know you're interested in these tactical details. Guess what the real heart of the army was, while the chariots dazzled on the flanks? Despite all the glory and power of the chariot corps, wars were won on the ground by the feet of simple infantrymen. It was the infantry that was the backbone, holding the line and taking territory. The New Kingdom army was brilliantly organized. All infantry was divided into large formations, or divisions, numbering about 5,000 men. These divisions were not just numbered. They bore the names of the chief gods of Egypt, Amun, Ra, Ta, and Set. This division again emphasized the religious nature of the war. A soldier fought not just in the first division, but in the division of Amun, feeling himself a part of a divine host. This was a powerful motivator and the basis for corps spirit. Each division, in turn, was divided into smaller units. The smallest tactical unit was a squad of 10 soldiers, commanded by a leader of 10. 5 of these squads made up a platoon. This clear hierarchy ensured excellent command and control on the battlefield. Orders could be passed quickly down the chain from the general to the common soldier. This allowed the pharaoh to maneuver tens of thousands of men. The core of the army was the heavy infantry. The main protective gear was a large shield, almost man-high. It was made of wood and covered with thick ox hide, with a rounded top. This infantryman was armed primarily with a long spear. In a dense formation, protected by a wall of shields, a unit of infantry was a formidable force, capable of withstanding an enemy charge. For close combat, everyone had a short sword, or the famous khopesh. This sickle-shaped sword was a unique weapon. It was not designed for thrusting. Its shape was perfect for hooking and pulling away an enemy's shield, opening him up for a strike. This complex system required incredible supplies. In the next chapter, we'll learn how the Egyptians managed to feed 20,000 men in the middle of a hostile desert. Are you ready to learn their main logistical secret?
We march until sundown.
We admire the tactics and weapons, but the true, though invisible, strength of the Egyptian army lay in its logistics. The great General Napoleon said that an army marches on its stomach. For Egypt, which fought in the most arid regions of the world, this was the absolute truth. Their genius for supply was unsurpassed in the ancient world. As long as the Egyptian army was within the country's borders, its main transport artery was the Nile. Barges could quickly and cheaply deliver thousands of tons of provisions to any point in the country.
Place the grain here and the oil jars by the ropes. We must increase the pace. Keep working.
The difficulties began during foreign campaigns, to Syria, Canaan, or deep into Nubia. Here, the army entered hostile territory, devoid of developed infrastructure. And this is where the Egyptian bureaucrats came in. The staple of a soldier's diet was bread and beer. This was not a luxury, it was a vital necessity. Beer in ancient Egypt was thick, caloric, and nutritious, serving the soldier as both food and drink, while being much safer than water from dubious sources.
The bread is fresh, at least.
To provide the army with this, the Egyptians didn't carry everything with them. They built entire supply networks. Along key military routes, such as the Ways of Horus on the Sinai Peninsula, a chain of fortresses and fortified warehouses was built. These fortresses served not only as defensive points, but as giant logistical hubs. They contained wells, bakeries, and huge granaries. The army could move from one such base to the next, replenishing its supplies. Furthermore, the Egyptians drove live provisions with them. Huge herds of oxen and goats accompanied the army, providing the soldiers with fresh meat. Overseeing this entire system were the scribes. These men in linen kilts were just as important as the generals. They kept meticulous records of every loaf of bread, every jug of beer, every pair of sandals, and every era. The Pharaoh's army could only function thanks to this powerful bureaucratic machine. They knew how to count, plan, and organize the flow of resources on a scale unheard of for that time. And in this lies another shocking truth. The Egyptian army conquered not only with the spear and bow, but with the scribe's ledger. Their main weapon was organization. What I'm about to show you was forbidden knowledge for Egypt's enemies. The deserts surrounding Egypt to the west and east were its natural walls. They reliably protected the Nile Valley from invasion. But sometimes the Egyptians themselves had to cross these lifeless expanses. For most peoples of antiquity, the desert was an insurmountable barrier, a place of certain death. But the Egyptians, over the millennia of their history, learned to interact with it. Their experience was gained not in wars, but in peaceful expeditions. They sent teams to the quarries of the eastern desert for granite or to the turquoise mines of the Sinai. These expeditions taught them how to survive in extreme conditions. They knew what no one else did. The key to the desert was water. The Egyptians knew the location of every hidden well, spring, and oasis. These routes were the greatest state secret. Their primary transport animal in the desert was the donkey. Camels had not yet been widely domesticated in that period and were not used on a mass scale. This meant that the army's entire route was planned as a chain of marches from one water source to the next. A day's march could not exceed the distance the unit could travel without water. For navigation in the endless sands, they had special guides. Often, this role was filled by the Medjay Nubians, who grew up in similar conditions. They could navigate by the stars, the sun, and by barely perceptible landmarks.
Faster, sons of Ra! Charge!
The Egyptians were masters of fast, maneuverable warfare.
Loose your
They
arrows!
preferred to decide the outcome of a battle in the open field. However, their opponents in Canaan and Syria understood this perfectly. These peoples built massive, well-fortified cities on hills.
Around the eastern ridge at dawn.
Their strategy was not to engage the formidable Egyptian army in open battle. They preferred to wait it out behind thick walls, hoping the pharaoh would run out of supplies or patience. Therefore, the Egyptians had to become experts in siegecraft, whether they liked it or not. The first and simplest method was a blockade. The army would surround the city, cutting it off from all sources of water and food. In parallel, the Egyptians would demonstratively destroy everything in the vicinity, burning fields, cutting down vineyards and olive groves. This was a powerful psychological attack. The defenders on the walls watched as the basis of their livelihood was destroyed. This was intended to break their will to resist and force them to surrender. If the city continued to hold out, the engineers went to work. The Egyptians, who built the pyramids, were unsurpassed masters of earthworks and engineering. Their main siege weapon was not the battering ram, but the ramp. Soldiers would begin to build an enormous earthen ramp, leading directly to the top of the enemy wall. This was a titanic effort, requiring months of labor. Up this ramp, they could roll battering rams or move assault teams. The Egyptians did have battering rams as well. Usually it was a heavy log that was swung to break through wooden gates. Sometimes it was mounted on a wheeled platform with a canopy to protect the soldiers from arrows from the walls. A siege was the Egyptian army's most disliked, but sometimes necessary task. It required not so much bravery as patience, engineering skill, and flawless logistics. We've already briefly touched on weapons, but the equipment of the common soldier deserves special attention. Contrary to popular belief, the Egyptian army was not a bronze army. Metal was expensive and used sparingly. The main protection for most infantrymen was not armor, but the large shield. However, some body protection did exist. Instead of metal cuirasses, soldiers wore quilted vests.
Lock the formation!
These vests were made from multiple layers of linen cloth, which were glued or stitched together. The result was a thick yet flexible material capable of stopping an arrow fired from a long distance. Helmets were also not universal. Common soldiers most often wore simple leather or cloth caps, which might be reinforced with metal plates. Real bronze helmets were a privilege of officers. The real revolution, which Egypt adopted from its enemies, the Hyksos, was the composite bow. This was a high-tech weapon, the pinnacle of engineering thought of its time. It was not made from a single piece of wood. It was glued together from several layers of different materials. Wood for the core, horn for the belly, and sinew for the back. This sandwich gave the bow incredible elasticity and power in a relatively small size. It was far more effective than the simple wooden bows used by their opponents. When we talk about Egypt, we primarily think of the land army. However, for a civilization that literally lived on the river, the navy was an equally important instrument of war. The Nile was the country's main highway, and whoever controlled the Nile controlled Egypt. For most of its history, the Egyptian navy was primarily for transport. Its task was not naval battles. Its task was the rapid and efficient transport of troops and supplies. The ships were essentially large wooden or reed barges, propelled by oars and sometimes a sail. They allowed the pharaoh to quickly move thousands of soldiers from Thebes to the Delta to suppress a rebellion. The navy was especially important for campaigns in Nubia. The Nile was the only road into that country. The army advanced southward on ships, which allowed them to bypass the inhospitable desert and quickly reach enemy territory. True naval battles became a reality for Egypt relatively late in the New Kingdom era. The threat came from the sea in the form of the Sea Peoples, a coalition of piratical tribes that was devastating the Mediterranean. The greatest naval battle in Egypt's history occurred under Ramses III. The Egyptians were not natural seafarers, unlike their opponents. Their ships were less maneuverable in the open sea. Therefore, Ramses III used a ruse. He allowed the enemy fleet to enter the narrow channels of the Nile Delta, where maneuverability lost its importance. Here, the Egyptian navy became what it had always been, a platform for the army. The battle on the water turned into a land battle. Egyptian ships were filled with archers who rained arrows down on the enemy. Crows' nests were set up on the mast. And finally, the last fact that completely destroys the myth of a monolithic Egyptian army. The Pharaoh's army, especially during its periods of peak power and decline, was one of the most multinational in the ancient world. The Egyptians were pragmatists and did not hesitate to use the military talents of others. For millennia, the core of the elite parts of the Egyptian army was Nubians. Warriors from the Medjay tribe, who originally came from the southern desert, became synonymous with scouts and police. Libyans living west of the Delta were often enemies of Egypt, but at the same time, they were eagerly hired into the Pharaoh's service. After the clash with the Sea Peoples, the unthinkable happened. The Pharaohs began to hire their former enemies. Thus, warriors from the Shurden tribe, recognizable by their distinctive horned helmets, became the personal guard of Ramses II. In the late period, when Egypt was trying to defend its independence from Persia, the core of its army was composed of Greek hoplites. The pharaohs paid enormous sums for thousands of Greek mercenaries.
Hold the line for the
Why did
Pharaoh.
these men fight for Egypt? The reasons varied. Nubians and Libyans often settled in Egypt as entire tribes, receiving land for their service. Many of these mercenaries became fully assimilated. They took Egyptian names, married local women, and adopted Egyptian gods. Over time, entire military dynasties in Egypt had foreign origins. This system was both a strength and a weakness. It gave Egypt access to the best military specialists of its time, but it also made Egypt dependent on loyalty that could be bought. Thus, the shocking truth about Egyptian warfare is that it was not a war of Egyptians against the rest of the world. It was the war of a complex multinational imperial machine, operating on the principles of ideology, logistics, and pragmatism. We see that the war machine of ancient Egypt was far from the stereotypes we are used to seeing. It was not just an army, but a highly complex system where ideology was as important as the sword, and a scribe with his ledger was no less valuable than a general. They turned bureaucracy into a weapon and the desert into a fortress moat. The Egyptians perfected logistics, standardization, and psychological warfare. They were pragmatists who were not ashamed to learn from their enemies, adopting their chariots and composite bows, and hiring them as elite guardsmen. Their strength was not in blind fury, but in cold calculation, order, and the ability to maintain that order hundreds of kilometers from home. For them, war was not chaos, but the most extreme method of restoring divine harmony. What other secrets of ancient Egypt would you like to uncover? Perhaps you are interested in their medicine, daily life, or building secrets? Suggest topics for future videos in the comments, and we will try to cover them. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new
Closely, my
investigations.
children, for these tales are the heartbeat of our people, echoing through the sands of time.